Now that Ayaka's been out for about a week, I've been playing around with her artifacts and testing her out in Spiral and in different places. The team that seems to have been working the best for me is a Permafreeze team, and I'd like to kind of break it down and talk about each of the different components and what options you have, especially as a free-to-play player, when you don't have access to every character and every weapon. So for Permafreeze Ayaka comp, you're going to firstly want Ayaka. Then you're going to want a Hydro Applier, someone who can apply Hydro to the enemies in order to freeze them. Your third slot will be someone who can swirl, so an Animo character with Veritas and Veneris set. And then for your fourth slot, you're going to want a Cryo character that will provide you with Cryo Resonance, which will help increase your Ayaka's crit rate. I'm quickly just going to break down which weapons and artifacts you want to use on her after being able to test them out in the game. So for the kind of free-to-play or cheaper to spend 4-star weapons, the three best that I kind of found are the Blackcliff, the new craftable Amenoma Kageuchi, and then finally the Black Sword, which is not free-to-play, but I think it really helps her kit. Firstly, for the Blackcliff, it's just a great weapon. Sadly, against large bosses, you don't really get the passive, so all you're getting is high base attack and high crit damage, and that's really good for her. It really helps, it fits in with the Blizzard Strayer set, and it helps you get that really high crit ratio, or basically crit damage, and decent attack. The new craftable weapon, the Amenoma Kageuchi, is extremely good, and this is the one that I would recommend if you haven't already bought a Blackcliff. As even though it has low base attack, the attack percentage substat is extremely good, helping increase your damage, and then the passive is very easy to use and apply. Basically, it'll help you get your Q back faster, and you can easily utilize it to its fullest potential. I would recommend refining it a couple times if you have the prototypes for it. But even at R1, it's very, very good. Thirdly, the Black Sword. I think it's more valuable than how I saw it before Ayaka was released, because now I see crit rate being actually very important on Ayaka. By having a higher crit rate around 50%, even with a Blizzard Strayer set, allows you to do stuff like basically build melt comps, or even just switch your team composition to not need Cryo Resonance or not need freezing. So the crit rate from the Black Sword is actually really good. And then with Ayaka, after you use her burst, the only source of damage you're going to have with her mostly is going to be her charged attack. And so the charge attack buff from the Black Sword is very, very good, I think. Once you do get your Ayaka to a very high level with something over 200% crit damage and about 2000 attack, then your crits are going to be hitting extremely hard. For the artifacts, obviously 4-piece Blizzard Strayer is the best, and then the 2-piece Blizzard Strayer and 2-piece Gladiator is a very good option, and I think it's better for a melt team, but you do have to hit that sort of 2000 attack and then 200% crit damage stats in order to see the same results. For the second component of the Permafreeze team, we need a Hydro Applier. There's basically 3 good options that you can have. The first being Mona, and as a free-to-play, most of us are not going to have a Mona. Some of us will though. So if you do have a Mona, I think she's the best Hydro unit for Permafreeze Ayaka team. It's also a little bit for a one-cycle team, so you freeze them and then you're trying to one-cycle whoever you're fighting, whether that's on Spiral 12 or elsewhere. What's so good about Mona is that she has an AoE Hydro application, and that's really good for freezing everyone and then hitting them with your ult. The biggest drawback with Mona is that she's a 5-star, and otherwise she's also really good because she can do a lot of damage by herself, which will help you speedrun stuff like Spiral 12 when you're trying to get those 36 stars. The next person would be Xingqiu. Xingqiu has more of a single target Hydro application, but combined with Ayaka's sprint, it's pretty easy to freeze people. So he's a really, really good option also. I'd say he's the second best option because he's still able to dish out a lot of damage once you kind of build him a little bit towards a damage dealing Xingqiu, but you still want to have his 200% energy recharge so that he can actually get his ult up consistently. The third option that everyone's going to have, in the case that you don't have a Xingqiu or you don't have a Mona, is going to be Barbara. And I'd say Barbara works relatively well. You might want to run her with something like Sacrificial Fragments if you want to get her E up more often, because the cooldown is relatively long. But you can also run her with things like Thrilling Tales, which will help buff your Ayaka's attack damage, so that's really good. And her E application, which gives you a little Hydro Ring that you can apply Hydro onto people when you walk up to them, works really well with Ayaka's Sprint, because you basically instantly freeze people when you're running around and popping out of the ground with it. The problem that I see with Barbara is that she doesn't contribute much to your overall damage, and so you're missing out on a little bit of DPS when you run her, and that's not great when you're trying to save a lot of time in Spiral. Moving on to the third slot, we're going to want a Swirl character running Viridis and Venerer. The three options would be Kazuha, Venti, and Sucrose. I think Kazuha is the best out of these three because he helps apply about a 40% cryo damage bonus to Ayaka when you swirl the cryo element, on top of the resistance shred from the Viridis and Venerer, and so he can help buff Ayaka's damage the most out of these three options. Venti is really good for grouping enemies together, so when you have people that you can actually group, he's really good for that, but it can be a little bit harder to land his ult in the right spot, and you can definitely miss with him. Sucrose is sort of the best of both worlds, and at C6 she has a very similar effect as Kazuha does, and so she's a very, very great option too. And for your swirling slot, it doesn't really matter in my opinion who out of these three you use, because they're all very, very good, and it's not going to have as much of an effect on your team as in the other slots, such as the Hydro application or who you're going to use for Cryo Resonance. For the fourth slot, for your Cryo Resonance, from what it looks like, Ganyu is probably the best support that you can have. And what you can do with Ganyu is, even if you build her as a DPS, you can use her ult to help basically apply cryo to a large area, and then you can freeze people very easily. And also what you could do with her is use Ayaka more as a burst support or a burst DPS, where you're mostly using Ganyu for her charged attacks to dish out damage, and then you're slowly recharging Ayaka's ult, and then once you get Ayaka's ult, you can just drop her ult and then switch back to Ganyu. The next best option would be Diona. Diona is much more of a support than Ganyu would be, because she'll provide you a shield and she provides healing. Again, the problem with the Diona is that she doesn't really help with damage, and her C6 effect, which increases your elemental mastery, doesn't help much. You can try to utilize that by using your swirling character if they're on an EM build, in order to buff your swirling character while they do swirls by standing on her ult. But otherwise, Diona's just a very solid support, but she doesn't quite add to your DPS also. The last character I threw on this list would be Chongyun, just in case you don't want to be doing dashes with Ayaka to infuse her with cryo. You could use someone like Chongyun, although I don't recommend it. Everyone should have a Diona, and I think that's what they should use. The last character I'd like to talk about is for a Hydro Applier. The new 5-star that we're going to be getting is Kokomi, and we don't know what her skills are yet, but if she's able to apply basically AoE Hydro and potentially some sort of Hydro application after she leaves the field, she could be a really good replacement for any of these other units that we've listed above. The other comments I wanted to make about Ayaka that I've kind of experienced when I was testing her out and using her in Spiral is that you really probably want to take her to level 80 and then ascend her to her max ascension. So not level her up to 90, but I think ascend her to 6 stars. And that's because you get an extra 10% crit damage bonus and a little bit more of an attack increase. This is really good when you're trying to maximize her crit damage and her attack, and you're really trying to one-cycle stuff, and so you're really trying to get the maximum potential out of Ayaka. I don't think it's worth taking her to 90 if you don't have the resources, because the only thing that you're basically getting at that point is mostly just attack, or base attack, and that's not going to have a very large effect on your total damage output. If you're using an attack percent sword like the new craftable one, you might see a larger increase in your attack, so it might be more worth taking to 90, but it's very resource expensive, and if you're a free-to-play player, I don't think it's worth it because level 80 Ayakas are very powerful anyways. The biggest thing I found with Ayaka is that you really want to maximize her for the end game content, and so even if she doesn't seem strong enough at the beginning, make sure you do farm a really good Blizzard Strayer set, and once you do reach the 2000 attack and about 200 or 230 ideally % crit damage, you should be able to be getting close to 36 starring or clearing those Spiral 12 floors in about a minute and a half, which should give enough time for your other team to do the same on the other side. But the endgame content is very hard, and so I say don't feel bad if you can't do it. But with the Ayaka Permafreeze team, I would say you have to very much hyper invest into it and get as many more damage sources from the rest of your team, using people like Mona and Ganyu in order to increase your DPS and speed up your run. That's everything for this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.